Faza'il A'mal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 20. Blind Reliance, Excessive Trust, and Exaggeration.
Darul Uloom was doing a lot of activities, working at the constitutional level. If it's Mullah Shabir Usmani, rahmatullah alayhi, for example, or if it was Jama Tablighi doing da'wah, being strong on da'wah, bringing people back to the masjid. There was a whole difference.
Now we come to page 284 and 285, which is the tail end of the thesis written by Dr. Younis Al-Turkistany. And here he has three specific points in regards to why the FA contains so many weak hadith, and we would say it's in fact 56% weak, fabricated and baseless narrations. The first point that he brings, and I'll share the page with you here, is that the author chose to rely upon books that made no distinction between authentic and inauthentic narrations. And examples of these books are, the titles are given here, Tanbih al-Ghafilin min ahadith Sayyid al-Mursaleen, and Qurrat al-Ayun by Abu Layth al-Samarqandi, another book, very famous book called Ihya Ulumuddin by Al-Ghazali, and other books by scholars mentioned here. So he had excessive blind reliance upon these books and these authors. Another thing, he relied upon authors blindly who made no clear distinction between their use of fabricated and non-fabricated narrations. And the examples of the authors that he gives here are Al-Bayhaqi and As-Suyuti. And the thesis itself gives you the critiques of these authors and how Sheikh Zakaria should not have in fact relied upon these authors when clearly authentic literature exists that was totally disregarded. The third point was his excessive reliance upon ahadith that contain exaggerations in regards to rewards and punishments. And this is something that he did in order to stir the emotions of the laymen and to impress upon them when these sorts of narrations that have excessive rewards, and I've given examples of this on this channel, are generally out and out fabricated. So weakness upon weakness, blind reliance, excessive trust and exaggeration proved there. Enough with the TJ, enough with the FA. Now we come to a thesis that was submitted to the University of Exeter in 2011. It's called Abu Huraira, Narrator of Hadith Revisited, an examination into the dichotomous representation of an important figure in Hadith with special reference to classical Islamic modes of criticism. So, in a nutshell, this thesis that was submitted in 2011 for a degree of Doctor of Philosophy by an individual called Dr. Uthman Ghani is looking at one very prolific hadith narrator, specifically the individual called Abu Huraira. And what he does is he goes through both classical and modern criticism of this hadith narrator. Specifically, the critique made about him that he had prolific narration. And in this screenshot here, I've given you modern scholarship's opinion upon Abu Huraira. He mentions an individual called Mahmud Abu Raya, who died in 1970, and if you read the thesis for yourself, it will show how Mahmud Abu Raya himself used fabricated sources and narrations. And then there are other individuals that you should be more than familiar with at this stage. People like Ignaz Goldziher, Alfred Guillaume, and Gautier Yunbol. Now, apart from Guillaume, you should know Ignaz Goldziher well, and you should know Yunbol. In fact, I've given you a whole book you can read about Yunbol, and in previous episodes I've deconstructed his particular approach to hadith. But there's another individual who is a North African female feminist author called Fatima Mernissi, who was born in 1940. Let's have a look to see what this doctoral research says about Mernissi. And Mernissi is an individual again who is known for attacking Abu Huraira, this prolific hadith narrator and companion of the Prophet. It says, Mernissi in her style of writing paints Abu Huraira out to be a difficult case to deal with, an arrogant man. And she gives examples on the screen here. This is what Uthman Ghani broke down. This is how he analysed her situation. We can see the discrepancies of Mernissi here. As mentioned earlier, these can be misconstrued totally if one is oblivious to the actual account. To summarise, it is sufficient to establish that Mernissi's arguments are not only weak, but also that the sources and references she has used to justify her argument have been misunderstood and also misconstrued. It is also sufficient to say that the evidence she relies on stems from the very people or companions that she has criticised in her work. So, it can be argued that by nullifying the people who narrate these reports, how can it be logical to use their reports in order to justify your own position? Meaning, why would you use a source that you are seeking to undermine in order to bolster your claim? In mathematics, this is known as the self-referring problem. How can a system that refers to itself seek to prove the truthfulness of itself? How can people who criticize these narrators use the same sources and individuals they are criticizing in order to bolster their claim? This is a very big contradiction in Mernissi's approach to her critique of this prolific hadith narrator Abu Huraira. And the thesis is well worth a read. Again, well over 300 pages. It clearly lays out the critique of these people and how the critiques are in many cases misconstrued and irrelevant. Stay tuned for many more parts.